do you feel like teaching kids to cook could innately like help to curb or end the picky eating epidemic?
I mean, I call it the star move. It's the parents' best strategy for sure, particularly because most people, when they have a picky eater, we end up with a lot of stress at the table. And it's nobody's fault. It just happens. We end up entering into power struggles. We're saying if you eat 3 bites of broccoli, you can have your dessert, which is really interrupting the child's natural relationship with food.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Earth Food First podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Navama, toddler mama, cookbook author, food lover, and certified integrative nutrition coach on a mission to reimagine kid food culture to protect our children's whole health. That means body, mood, and mind. What if one basic skill could not only deter your children from picky eating behavior, but also help protect their lifelong health? I'm pretty sure every parent would want in on that secret. In this episode, we're exploring how teaching kids to cook could play a pivotal role when it comes to ending both the processed food epidemic as well as the picky eating epidemics, which are quietly robbing our children of their right to live long lives in good health. Did you know that the steady decline of home cooking that began occurring post-World War II directly correlates with the decline in public health in the US that's been happening for the last several decades? So basically, as people have been cooking less and eating more processed food, they've become far less healthy, adults and children alike. As fewer and fewer generations learn how to cook whole food from scratch, a dependency on highly processed foods grows, contributing to a decrease in consumption of earth food like vegetables, fruits, and lean proteins, which are the foods we need to thrive. But today's transformative guest is on a mission to spark a cooking renaissance, educating parents on why this lost art is actually a critical life skill and empowering kids to learn to cook for themselves. The one and only Katie Kimball is known as the national voice of healthy kids cooking and creator of the Kids Cook Real Food e-course, touted by the Wall Street Journal as the best online cooking class for kids. Katie is also host of the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast, a 2-time TEDx speaker, former teacher, writer, and mom of 4 kids. Through her popular blog, Kitchen Stewardship, Katie helps families stay healthy without going crazy and guides parents through picky eating struggles with the Picky Eating Playbook membership club. In today's conversation, we'll cover how cooking can be used as a tool to protect your family from the processed food epidemic, why cooking should be considered a critical life skill, the serious risks of raising kids who can't cook, why picky eating isn't about the food, and how cooking with your kids can deter picky eating behavior. So Katie, welcome to the Earth Food First podcast. I am so grateful that you were willing to come on today, and I've been following you for about 2 years. You are such a thought leader in this space when it comes to children's health and kind of reimagining how we teach our kids to eat. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share with us today.
Well, thank you. It's an uphill battle, but any group of parents that I get to speak to it's another step in the right direction. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I remember when I first got forwarded one of your newsletters and I was just launching Earth Food First, and I was not only excited to see another human believing what I believed and talking what I wanted to talk about, but also just you were so deeply and specifically committed to teaching kids to cook. So what led you to become this like voice of healthy kids cooking?
I didn't start out this way. Back when I was first having kids and starting my blog was way back in 2009. So this is like, I'm kind of an OG blogger, and I started out working with moms. Like I had such a struggle myself learning to cook and trying to figure out what to feed my kids, and I felt this constant tension between my budget and my time and my kids' nutrition, and how do I make it all work? And I'm a teacher by trade. I'm a teacher at heart. And so the more time I was spending at the cutting board doing nothing but make mistakes, I was thinking, gosh, how can I help other people in my circles do this easier and smooth the path and save their budget while also having good nutrition for their family. And so that's where I started sort of entering in online. And the more I interacted with my audience, the more I heard a really similar story. People would say, Katie, I'm learning how to cook, and this is great, but it's such an uphill battle to be healthy because my mom never taught me. Mm-hmm. So that was the refrain, right? My mom never taught me to cook. I think that's, the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Parents really, they loved us, and in a sort of a misguided, loving way, they thought if they made our childhoods easier, that would be a good thing. But it's made our adulthoods really complicated because we're going like, I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to clean a toilet. I don't know how to sew a button,
Yeah.
And so I began to realize that because we aren't confident as a general generation in the kitchen, we aren't bringing our kids in. And then we're seeing that in things like the picky eating epidemic, where kids aren't able to interact with their food in a healthy way because they're only seeing it at the table. Mm-hmm. And so as a teacher, as a mom of 4, I thought, I think I can step into this gap where we have a real need. We have a real need to help parents be comfortable inviting their kids into the kitchen and saying yes, even when they're not yet comfortable cooking on their own, potentially. And so that was 2016, when we created our cooking class. And again, that just started as really practical for me. But it's grown into so much more and such an important platform. There are a lot of people saying, we should get healthy. But there aren't a lot of people saying, here's how to do it with kids. Specifically, they need to get their hands messy and they need to get into the business of cooking.
Yes, it's so true. So many people are focusing on what healthy food do I go buy at the store that's already healthy and I can just put it. And it's like, no, you got to do that one step before that, which is cooking. So you went so far as to create this great program, Kids Cook Real Food. And it was actually named the best online cooking course for kids by the Wall Street Journal. I know there's other programs online, but what was sort of the goal of your course and what made it so effective?
That was such a treat, by the way, when the Wall Street Journal reached out and said, can we test out your course?
I can imagine.
Our course is very unique because, couple things. First, it focuses on skills, not recipes.
Okay.
And a lot of times when people are teaching, especially kids, to cook, it's let's make this fun recipe. And also, P.S., the fun recipe usually has sprinkles.
Right.
And it's usually baking.
Right.
And so actually just real food, just cooking real food of fruits and vegetables and whole grains, like already vaults me into a very small space online. But also the fact that I want kids to have a huge toolbox of practical skills. I want them to be able to go online and find recipe A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z and go, yeah, I can make that.
Yeah.
And have the confidence and not like, hey, mom, can I make, recipe X again? Because it's the one that I learned at my rec center cooking class. So for me, it's teaching, I figured out like what are the sort of the 30 basic cooking skills that we need.
Yeah. And I love that you're the mom that you're not like, oh, I've always loved to cook. And so I got in because that's actually me. Like I actually came from a food family. Like I've always loved to cook, but I like that you're teaching from where most moms I know are at, which is you weren't the best cook in the world. You taught yourself, and then you're not a trained chef and you can speak the language that these families are speaking. That makes so much sense why your program's so successful. And I think now, today more than ever, we need a course like yours because it was a study from Tufts University found that over 67% of kids' calories are coming from ultra-processed foods. And between you and me, it's probably way more than that for a lot of children. And they are just being raised in this processed food epidemic. More and more research is coming out that's stating that, this is the first generation that will have a shorter lifespan than their parents and due in large part to, this overconsumption of ultra-processed foods. So what role do you think cooking specifically can play in curbing and hopefully one day ending the processed food epidemic?
It is an uphill battle, Lindsay, because when parents think about what do I feed my kids, it's going to the store. I mean, the food marketers are coming into our homes.
Right.
Via many mediums. They are coming into our homes and they're telling us what to think and what to buy and how to feed our kids and how to parent. And they have no business doing that. Their business is selling stuff.
Right.
And so we've got to retrain our own brains as the adults. Like, let's stop letting the people who are profiting off of the backs of our kids sell us the health information that we need, right?
Yeah.
That's it's a massive mental shift.
Right.
And it feels really difficult because for people, especially if you were raised in a processed food or even a semi-processed food family, you're very uncomfortable. People are scared of the unknown. And so I think a lot of people out there are in my position where, of course, if my mom hadn't done it, I'd never seen it done, right? I didn't have the model. And so when we're used to the processed foods, we're very, very nervous about anything else. And so the more we can get, especially at a young age, the more we can get kids used to the fact that food comes in a whole form, we get to process it, we cut it, we cook it, and we can make lots of choices on how it feels in our mouth, the different textures and the, the seasonings that we put on it. And then that's what we eat, as opposed to we want to eat what's fast, cheap, and easy,
Yeah, I think also the more you cook whole food, and not only you become comfortable, but your taste buds balance back out, right? So I also know that cooking has a serious PR problem, right? After World War II, all the things happened. The processed food came into play. Women went out into the workplace and were very happy to have something else going on in their lives, rightly so. But now it's like looked at as this just annoying chore, and it's optional for so many people. We have DoorDash and Uber Eats. So how in your mind do we help parents reframe this and embrace it as an amazing tool for connection and actually a critical life skill?
Yeah, I said I came at it personally from a really practical standpoint.
Yeah.
I had just had my fourth child, and I was realizing I was spending so much time in the kitchen, I was barely seeing the little faces that I was feeding, right? Because I was coming at it from health, nutrition, my kids need this, therefore I will do it. I will get in line, I'll figure this out, and I'll take the entire burden of responsibility on myself. So when I started teaching my kids to cook, it was more of wow, I really need to share the responsibility in the household. And also my oldest was 10, which is just over that halfway mark to 18 where,
right,
parenting doesn't end, but it shifts.
Yeah.
I have a 19-year-old now. I used to say parenting ends at 18. That's not true. It just shifts. But I wanted to raise competent adults who could also cut the pepper,
right,
and also crush the garlic, so that they didn't have these great habits of eating vegetables, and eating whole foods. But if I sent them off without the skills to accomplish the habit, I'm not doing any good.
Right.
So that was me. I started from very practical points. And for some parents, that's going to be a great place to start. Maybe your child has a food allergy. You know what? It is much less expensive and much more safe for you to cook for yourself.
Yeah.
Than to trust others to do it, right? Maybe you just know in your heart that you want, I think this is where you're coming from. I want my kids to be healthy and wholesome and have this whole food diet. They have to learn to cook, to unlock the produce section. Literally, it is locked if you don't know knife skills, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's the very practical. But now that I've been working with 20,000 families from all over the world and seeing what happens when kids learn to cook, we can also come at it from a really beautiful emotional standpoint as moms. Right? Yes, I want my kids to be physically healthy, but when we get to the heart reasons, what do moms want? I want my kids to be confident, right? I want them to be resilient when they get picked on. I want them to be resilient when people offer them substances in high school.
Right.
I want them to be able to be organized and to get their work done and to be hard workers. We have so many dreams for our kids.
Right.
And it almost sounds trite, but it's not. Every single one of our dreams for our kids can happen in the kitchen. Because when we cook together as a family, we build these deep connections. It's when we have the best conversations. And we're working toward a common goal.
Right.
Think about adults that you're really bonded with. It's probably because you did something with them that mattered.
Yep.
So you're working shoulder to shoulder. You're building that connection with your kids. And research tells us that connections, a strong bond with an adult, is the best protection. So why do we teach our kids to cook? Because we want them to be amazing people,
right?
Top to bottom. That's the reason.
Yep. It's such a great analogy because it's so true. So there's parents who like to cook and enjoy it. There's parents that don't know how and don't like it. Where do these two groups of people start?
Well, by getting over ourselves.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
I don't like raw celery. I never have. And it felt like a revelation to me that I could still buy raw celery and make my kids ants on a log, even if I didn't eat it. That's okay. So whether you like cooking and you want to pass it on, or you really kind of despise it, it is our duty to make sure that our kids are nourished and to make sure that they grow up with some
Yeah.
genuine life skills. So we've got to realize it's not about ourselves. And our kids can see us floundering. Our kids can see us make mistakes. They can see that we are humble and we don't always know what we're doing. I think that's actually really healthy for them when parents say, let's learn this together.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And it's so funny because cooking is this one thing. Again, I know right now it's not considered a critical life skill anymore. You and I and many other people are trying to change that. But parents don't say, I don't really like to read. I'm not going to teach my kids to read. This basic human necessity. Without it, our kids are getting so sick, and parents, we have to stop letting ourselves opt out of it. But so my daughter, Stella, she's 4, and I'm teaching her to cook, right? I realize now I am so lucky because I did grow up with a mom that enjoyed cooking. She taught me how to cook. Now I'm passing that on. But most of my friends, like I said, don't cook or they don't know how because their parents did not teach them. So it's just not top of mind. What is the actual risk if we continue raising generations that don't cook and don't value cooking?
The farther we get from our food, which if we aren't buying it in whole food form, we're allowing many degrees of separation. The farther we get from our food, first of all, the health, of course, of the person is going to decline. But honestly, the real risk is societal, because the farther we get from understanding that food grows in a field or walks around and eats things that grow in a field, the less care we're going to give our farmers.
Yeah. And, it's funny. I go into the grocery store and I look at the produce and you hear how much of it gets thrown away and what percentage of people actually eat enough produce. And you realize if we have generations that aren't cooking, right, the farmers aren't, to your point, going to have enough money to keep farming. And eventually we're going to be even more tied to the big food corporations who are going to be like, this is great. And we're not even going to have the option to buy all the whole food we need anymore. And I think that place is rapidly, approaching. So we really need to recognize that cooking is just that perfect place to begin to support our farmers and to support, our children's health. Okay, so in each episode, we do a magic wand question. If you could wave a magic wand, what is one thing that you wish every parent knew about cooking as it relates to children's mental and physical health?
I think the most important thing for parents to understand is that it doesn't have to be difficult. A lot of times when I'm speaking, I can feel parents thinking, oh, great, Katie, now I have to teach kids to cook on my to-do list. And that's like a 127-step process. And so I give up before I start.
Yeah.
And I remember speaking just in front of a small group of people locally. And I said something like, you don't have to teach kids to cook like tomorrow. Just teach them to measure a teaspoon of salt tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? How do you just make that flat? And what does salt do to make our food taste so much better when we're cooking homemade food?
Yeah. I, at the risk of being redundant, I take it back to this reading analogy. No parent thinks we have to teach our kids to read in a year, right? We're totally okay with the fact that it's going to take several years. And you do have 18 years, right? And sometimes more, right? So just making it a part of everyday life, I think it does make it so much more palatable. We talked a lot about cooking. There's clearly a very strong case for teaching kids to cook as this uber powerful tool that can help with their health, possibly help curb at least this processed food epidemic. But today, children are also victims of the picky eating epidemic. And in addition to teaching kids to cook, you have so many resources to help families overcome picky eating struggles, including your absolutely brilliant TEDx talk called Picky Eating Isn't About the Food. And in that talk, you said something that was so profound to me in the first 5 minutes. And that was, eating is one of the hardest things humans ever have to learn to do. And I heard learn to do, inferring that they need to be taught and given ample opportunities to learn how to eat properly before we just label them picky eaters, right? But most parents don't know this. And so we have nearly half of kids today are labeled picky eaters. I want to know, like, how did we get to this place? And what can we do?
It's a rough place.
Yeah.
It's a rough place. And we've talked about the processed foods epidemic, and that is going hand in hand with the picky eating epidemic, because the advent of processed foods and really easy convenience foods made it so much easier for parents to short order cook.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned that the TEDx picky eating's not about the food. It really isn't. Preferenced eating starts in the child's body. They've got something going on with maybe the way they chew or their senses and the way they process their senses. Maybe they have some sort of undiagnosed food sensitivity and they have a low level of pain they can't articulate. There are lots and lots of root causes, generally physiological in the child, for picky eating. It's not parenting. Okay, so that's like good news for the parents.
Right.
Research actually shows that the way we parent, how depressed or not depressed we feel, what we eat, doesn't actually cause a picky eater.
Okay.
However, we can exacerbate it. We
Okay.
can help it grow by like feeding the picky eating monster instead of encouraging the adventurous eating child that is in there. So processed foods makes it very simple to say, well, I'll just make the mac and cheese.
Right.
Well, I'll just make the chicken nuggets.
This concept that you have to learn to eat, it's like, it's this thing that we think they are just innately born with. I think most parents. And so to your point, the first time they reject, or the second or even fifth or sixth or 10th time, we label this picky eating label on them. You know, the mac and cheese and all the nuggets become this scapegoat. And if we just kind of picked our heads up out of the like kind of current kid food culture we're living in and realized, oh, they're just learning eaters. Mm-hmm. They're not all picky eaters. Some are, right? Like truly the ones that have, you know, certain different things going on, maybe some neurological things. But these kids are not all picky eaters, but we're not giving them space to learn. And I think it sounds like we might just need to become parents who are better educated teachers about teaching kids how to eat and give them the space to learn and do that. For people that don't know the SOS approach, sequential oral sensory, can you just give a bite-sized nugget of what that means, what that approach looks like?
Yeah, sequential oral sensory. So in learning to eat, there are 32 steps in the process. And the majority of kids do learn just by being immersed in eating.
Yeah.
And when parents sort of give them space to go through those 32 steps, we do sort of somewhat do them naturally. They include things like the food touching your forehead.
Right.
Just to give an example. But there is also a percentage of kids who either because of their physiology or because of their environment. So just think of a mom who's very hygienic and doesn't like messes.
Okay.
And the moment the toddler starts eating, mom is wiping their face and wiping their forehead. And mom is wiping and wiping and wiping. And the child starts to associate, first of all, food with this cloth coming at my face and intruding in my space. But also the child doesn't get to experience the feeling of food in all these weird places, like an elbow and a wrist and a forehead. And that's actually can be very important steps. Most kids who miss steps begin to present as picky eaters because they're learners who didn't quite learn the process. So that's there is a sequence.
Okay.
And again, like I'm a teacher, and I remember learning to teach kids to read, and they said, 80% of kids learn to read by being read to and by seeing the words on the page, and it just sort of happens. 20% of kids need direct phonics instruction.
Right.
Their brains are just built a little differently. It doesn't mean that they're learning disabled or in any way, but it's the same for eating. A certain percentage of kids are just going to need a little bit more help or a little bit more space or time. It takes 2 years at least to learn to eat. Any interruptions extend that process.
Okay.
And it's an oral sensory process. So sometimes when we think about sensory processing difficulties getting in the way of eating, people will go, oh yeah, my kid has a texture thing. Or, oh, my kid has a smell thing. They don't like strong smells. Or, oh, my kid just doesn't like spicy stuff. And that makes sense to our brains that anything that happens in the oral nasal cavity would affect eating. But what sometimes we don't understand is that our sense of touch also on our hands, our sense of vision, our sense of hearing, it's all related in eating.
Right.
Eating uses every single sense. So any interruption or any over or under processing in any of the senses actually is going to impact the relationship with food, but we don't always look for it. right? We're looking for stuff like in the mouth, in the
Yeah.
texture, and the preferences. But even visual and auditory sensory processing can play in. And so we can use that to our advantage. So one really good example of other senses processing is a process called bridging, which is really interesting. Like, let's say you've got a really severe picky eater who only likes Ritz crackers.
Okay.
Like, not just crackers, but they will only eat the circular Ritz crackers.
Okay.
If you're going to try to start bridging them, you think of something they can see that's going to be the same. So
Okay.
you try to choose another cracker that is a circle, or another cracker that's the exact same color visually. And you can begin to help kids bridge using their visual sense in the same way as you might help them bridge using the sense of texture. You know, these are all the same texture.
Right.
So it's really, and this is, again, that's more of feeding therapy for kids
Okay.
who are really, really, really struggling to eat. But it's fascinating to see how all the senses need to be involved.
And because it is like one activity where all our senses are involved, it goes back to cooking, where also it's naturally an activity that's letting them interact with food without having to eat it, right? They're not, that's not what they're there for. They're there to touch it. They're there to cut it. They're there to smell it. Do you feel like teaching kids to cook could innately like help to curb or end the picky eating epidemic?
I mean, I call it the star move. It's the parent's best strategy for sure, particularly because most people, when they have a picky eater, we end up with a lot of stress at the table. And it's nobody's fault. It just happens. We end up entering into power struggles or saying, if you eat 3 bites of broccoli, you can have your dessert, which is really interrupting the child's natural relationship with food. And so to take food away from the table, to take off that pressure to eat, whether it's real or perceived, right? Like, some parents have done a wonderful job never pressuring their kid, but the kid sees a plate full of food coming and their brain says, what if they ask me to eat this? Right? And so they're stressed, and stress reduces appetite and interferes with relationships. So if we can get kids away from the table, not only do they not have that obligation to eat, real or perceived, so the stress level goes down, but they also get all that sensory exposure. They get to smell the food. They get to touch the food. They get to hear the crunch of the food. You know, they get to see the food shift, maybe from raw to cut to cooked. And that amount of exposure can absolutely speed up the time it's going to take a child to try a food and to enjoy that food.
So the current kind of kid food culture that we live in just does not place value on raising what I call like omni eaters, right? Kids who are comfortable eating a wide variety of real foods. And instead it really promotes this behavior that kind of places our kids' palates in this very limited box filled with processed foods. How would you say we can be the generation of parents that normalize raising omni eaters versus picky eaters?
That's a great phrase. Just like omni, like flexible eaters.
Right? It's like
eat
that.
something new. Yeah.
Yeah.
From the grassroots perspective, I mean, we vote with our dollars, right? So we can
Right.
try to change the culture of food marketing
Yeah.
by buying what we most want to eat.
Yeah.
I think that we can definitely change in our own home. Like, that's where we've got to start. We got to start changing the culture in our own home and
Yeah.
just talking really positively about eating and food, and it's not a pressure like you need to try that or everyone should try this. But it's allowing kids to have a little bit of their own agency. I'm not a proponent of saying whatever the kid wants to eat is okay,
Yeah.
but it's within the boundaries of, here are some real whole foods that I am choosing to serve for dinner.
Right.
You've got some options. You can choose your amount. You can listen to your body. If
Yeah.
kids have the whole world of processed foods open to them, they're going to lose because processed foods have all sorts of aces up their sleeve and they're cheating.
Yeah.
Right? The MSG, the sugar, it's all tricking our kids' taste buds into wanting that. So don't hear me say, I think we should encourage our, intuitive eating and our kids to just eat whatever feels good to their body. No. We don't have
Yeah.
the landscape for that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But we do need to allow our kids to have that relationship with food in our own household. We need to make sure that we're not controlling, but that we are setting boundaries.
Right.
You may not
Yeah.
eat this because I didn't buy it. It's not even in the house.
Yeah.
Where you're going to eat, you may choose what's on the table. And there's such a nice, gentle, calm feel to a table with a number of beautiful, vibrantly colored produce options, you know, and a mom or dad who can say, this is dinner. Let's sit down and have a lovely meal.
Right.
And you can choose what you eat. Although changing culturally, more family dinners, more emphasis on family dinners actually would be a really good start. But again, it's got to start in the home. It's got to be the family culture first.
If I'm a mom and I have a young child, what would be your top 2 tips for me to do to help possibly prevent the picky eating behavior from beginning?
I'm so excited someday soon maybe to make a course for moms of kids under 5, like
Yeah.
like how to prevent picky eating, because I think if we can start off on the right foot, we're doing so much better. Providing variety,
Okay.
allowing choice, massively helpful. Withholding sugary foods, withholding high sugar foods, especially
Yeah.
as long as possible and as often as possible. Not like when you're out, oh, you can't eat that, right? We're not trying to cause stress, but that in your own home, you are the gatekeeper.
Yeah.
And if you
Yeah.
don't want it going down your kid's body, don't buy it. I
Yeah.
think that's really, really, really important. And realizing that most of our kids will learn to eat all those 32 steps on their own if we give them the space to do it. So we fill our homes with books. We should fill our homes with also a variety of food, and eat with them. They
Yeah.
little ones need a model. I think it's very, very tempting, especially if you just have one child, to like feed them first, feed them
Right.
early, because
Yeah.
maybe the dinner for the adults isn't quite ready, or you're like, oh, they need to go to bed so early. But they really need at least one adult sitting down, eating with them, so that they see what eating looks like.
It's so true. And in the moments where some nights, if I can't, I at a minimum sit down and I eat a vegetable first with her. We're very veggie first, right, in our household. Like I try to serve them first most times. And so even at you can eat something with them, even if it doesn't end up being the whole meal. But I can't agree more. It's like it should be a social thing if you can sit down together and make it a positive experience. So in addition to your TED Talk, and I know you have like a membership program that parents can join if they are struggling with picky eating, but you also have this cool picky eating 5-day challenge. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
It's the best time of my year, to be honest, because I get to hear people coming in with a lot of fear and a lot of unknown. And, we've got kids who come in who are very severe picky eaters of eating 20 foods or less. We've got plenty of people who are just like, oh, my kids just won't try something new.
Yeah.
They're just stuck in their habits. And what I teach is the foundationary steps. It works for all of them. So we talk about things like managing snack time, making sure that your kid knows what it feels like to be hungry and have an appetite. I do teach veggies first. I call it lead with your ACE. Because
Yes.
the very first, food that hits your tongue when you're actually hungry is going to be the most palatable. It's going to taste the best. And so
Yeah.
we just kind of walk through these 5 steps. My goal is to be quick, actionable, interesting, and give one action step for each of the 5 days of the challenge. And what I love the most is that for parents who are taking the action steps, we know about 2/3 of the kids will try a new food during the challenge, which is a huge number.
Yeah.
It's not even the goal. Like part of me could care less about that number, because the biggest goal is that we're resetting our routines and we're reducing our stress and our power struggles at the dinner table. And 85% of our challengers find that.
That's amazing. No, in 5 days, it's like anyone can do something for 5 days. This has been such an illuminating conversation. I knew it would be, and I am just so glad that we got to sit down. I know people are going to want to be able to connect with you. Where can they learn about all things Katie Kimball, including your Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast, your Kids Cook Real Food cooking classes, your TEDx talks?
Thanks for asking, Lindsay. I'd actually love to give your audience a free gift. I talk about unlocking that produce section and what do we need for that. And it's those knife skills. And so whether you're at the stage of a butter knife and a banana, or your child's ready for a chef's knife, in my world, I teach all of the motions, the movements that you make with your hands and with the knife the same. And so our members' favorite class is our 10-minute knife skills video. And you can go to kidscookrealfood.com/earthfoodfirst and get that video completely free so you can kind of see what I do. And then, of course, the Picky Eating TEDx, just search Picky Eating Katie Kimball, or you can find me on Instagram at Katie Kimball Kids Cook.
Amazing. Thank you for that gift. I know my community will definitely be excited. They love hearing that I teach Stella to use knives. And I think that the more kids can do that, the better. So thank you for that. And also just thank you so much, Katie, for your deep, deep work and commitment to really giving families the tools that they need to help their children thrive. It's just such a priceless gift. And of course, thanks for sharing your time with us today, which I know is super precious. And as always, a big thanks to you for taking time to learn with us, question cultural norms, and for being bold in the face of change. And until next week, remember, teaching our kids to cook can produce generations of happier, healthier humans. If you learned something today, it would mean the world for you to follow, rate, and review our podcast and share it with your favorite families. But seriously, if you've been listening and you haven't done this yet, I'm asking you personally, please do. It makes a massive difference. These actions will literally help the show go on. For more Earth Food First goodness, follow along on Instagram at Earth Food First and at earthfoodfirst.com. Have a great week ahead.